Hey friends, how's everybody doing today? I hope you're having an amazing day. My name is Leslie Fritz and I'm here to bring you thrills, chills, and everything spooky. Do you believe in haunted houses? Well, if you don't, you might after this. Most stories about haunted houses all start out the same. The house seemed so normal until we got settled in. Well, this haunting, it wasn't going to wait for anyone. It started the first night anyone ever stayed there. And what happened to my cousins that night shook my family to the core. But before we dive into this chilling tale, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with anyone that loves a good scare, and don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales. Now let's get haunting. When I was 5, my family made a life-changing decision at a local estate auction and bought an old Victorian house. They instantly fell in love with the antique details and the creaky charm. There were whispers from the neighbors that the lady that had owned it had died there, but my parents weren't going to be swayed. The house was beautiful and had a presence about it that drew you in. I didn't really know at the time what we were stepping into because I was only 5. But looking back, this house had energy of its own, the kind that greeted you before you ever stepped inside. The activity began before we ever moved in. My cousins who lived in Indiana, they had drove down to help us move and get settled into the new place. They were so excited about the move because they had planned to be the first to stay in the house before anyone else. I remember them laughing and teasing my parents about how they'd be the first to christen the new home, but they had no idea what they were getting into. That night, they packed up their car with their sleeping bags and headed over to the house. My cousin had a toddler who had just begun to talk. He was a cute, curious little boy, always toddling after something or someone. At first, it seemed like a regular night. They were sitting around, laughing, snacking, telling each other ghost stories, trying to creep each other out in a big empty house before going to bed. And it wasn't too long after bedtime that everything changed. Her son had woken up and somehow managed to climb out of his makeshift bed. She woke to his tiny little voice echoing through the big house. "Mamma! Mamma!" She was so confused. Her mother, his grandmother, wasn't with them. She was back at the other house with my parents. But the little boy was insistent as he crawled toward the staircase in the dim light, calling out over and over, "Mamma! Mamma!" My cousin got up, still groggy, and followed after him, trying to coax him back to bed. But when she reached the bottom of the stairs, everything shifted. She saw her son staring up the stairs, and he was motioning to be picked up. As she followed his gaze, she froze. There, at the top of the stairs, stood a figure. It was a woman, dressed in a pale flowy gown. Her figure was faintly glowing, as if made from the moonlight. Her face was shadowed, but her head was tilted, watching the boy, motioning him to come to her. My cousin froze, her breath stuck in her throat as she locked eyes with the woman. Her presence was heavy, and the air thickened. She tried to call out to the others, but her voice got stuck in her throat. And then she started to move. Step by step, she started to descend the staircase, her movement slow and deliberate. Terrified, she snapped out of her fear, she scooped up her son, and she yelled to the others that were still sleeping. She threw open the door, and she ran outside into the chilly night air, and she didn't stop running until she reached her car. The rest of the night, they stayed huddled in the car, locked inside with the engine running to keep them warm. They didn't dare go back in that house. The fear was too real, too raw. Every creak and sound of the wind sounded like it was coming from inside. The next morning when my parents woke up, they were startled to see my cousins banging on the door, still in their pajamas, shivering and pale. They told my parents everything, but I was too young to understand what it meant at the time. It wasn't until years later when I started having my own experiences in that house that I realized the truth. The woman at the top of the stairs, she wasn't a dream or a figment of my cousin's imagination. She was real. I grew up in that house, and she always seemed to be lingering in the shadows. Thank you for hanging out with me and listening to my story. Do you have a ghost story of your own? Let me know in the comments or shoot me an email from my bio, and I might feature you in one of my stories. Goodbye for now, but until next time, happy haunting.